Does this have any relation to the word mujahideen itself? Because many people here, they say mujahideen, and I don't know if the word itself has a meaning to many of the Americans over here or not. Could you please explain to us?
Yes, I will. I would like first to clarify
this
something about this, that many people in America, I noticed this is my first visit to USA, but I noticed that some people here from ex-lectures I had misunderstand the word mujahideen. They have bad information or bad understanding, or let's say misunderstanding to that word. They think mujahideen are people who attack people, just, you know, or have hijack planes, aircrafts, like those who hijack the Kuwaiti aircraft. We are against this completely. This is not jihad. This is nonsense. Jihad is fighting for the sake of Allah, fighting for the path of Allah to protect our religion. We make jihad against those who prevent us from performing our, religion, or from following our divine revelation in Quran. Those who prevent us from performing our prayers, like the Russians doing, by the way, one man, it said in the Russian television, when they asked him why you could weep Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and you are unable to finish the war in Afghanistan, he said, well, whenever we hear Allahu Akbar, this is the weapon that we can do nothing about. So we can fight Mujahideen, but when they say Allahu Akbar, we cannot do anything. He said, we do urinate on our clothes. When we see Allahu Akbar, that's it. So Alhamdulillah, we have this power of Allah Akbar. We do feel in our jihad that Allah is with us, because we are with Allah. We never kill women. We have many times we have the chance of capturing their women, Russian women. And many leaders said we have captured them, we set them free. We did not touch them, because this is the characters of Islam. We are Muslims. We do not touch women, we do not touch girls, and these who are doing hijacking is completely against Islam.
So are the leaders against hijacking and things like that?
All of them are against hijacking. We do not believe in hijacking. As Muslims, this hijacking is not fair at all. You are killing innocent people, like these two Kuwaitis who were killed. What was their crime? Why? Just because they were Kuwaitis you killed them? Do you consider this is Islam? This is not Islam. This is against Islam. You don't kill innocent people. Go and fight those who are fighting you, if there is any fight. Go and fight the men. Don't kill people, innocent people who are not fighting, civilians doing nothing. This is not fair. This is not accepted in our religion, and you know what our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what our Prophet told us and warned us not to touch even plant, not to kill old people, not to fight those who are not fighting us. Only we do fight those who are fighting us.
During the fall in November, al-Sila at Harithya, located in the northern west bank of Jordan, the farmlands can be lush with produce as the warm climate saturates the fields. It can produce and give the landscape a flowing wave of green. On November 14, 1941, Abdullah Yusuf Azzam would be born. His mother, Zakia Sadeh Hussein al-Ahmad, was from a farming family in al-Sila, while his father, Yusuf Mustafa Yusuf Azzam, also a farmer as well as a butcher. The village was under British rule during this period and often met with light resistance from the Mujahideen. The British had unjustly suspected Yusuf as holding secret meetings with local Mujahideen and tried to burn down the Azzam household. This would witness Yusuf to now take arms against his foreign occupiers. It was the first time the young Abdullah saw his father in an armed struggle. It would shape his young life forever forward. November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly would approve for a partition plan for Palestine. This prompted a rebellion by Arab Palestinians, and by May 14, 1948, Israel would declare independence, leading Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state by entering an armed conflict in which it would fail. In 1949, the Armistice Agreement would begin creating the borders for Israel. The Haganah, a Zionist paramilitary organization, would begin displacing over 700,000 Palestinians, most of them fleeing to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In the local mosque in al-Sila, Azzam would notice many foreigners from Syria and Iraq. They would hold meetings here to help the Palestinian struggle. He also noted that many of them were not very religious at all. And Azzam would later note that true Islam would not enter the battle of 1948. The Muslim Brotherhood began participating in the 1948 war. This was seen as a noble act by many in the region. Azzam was deeply religious even at the age of 8. His religiosity was unusual during the 1950s and 60s. Arab nationalism was the dominant ideologically throughout the Arab world. In 1954, Azzam would join the Muslim Brotherhood into its Jordanian branch. Their beliefs were to influence Islamic society through education and grassroots activism. One of the leading members was Asad Abd al-Hadi, who would have a major influence throughout Azzam's young life. Al-Hadi would encourage Azzam to speak before people, and soon Azzam would start giving short lectures. He had been an ardent student in Islamic law and the Quran, and he would often spend many long hours into the evening reading the Quran over the many years. By 1960, he would become a teacher in the remote area of Adir, Jordan. By 1962, he would enroll at the Faculty of Sharia at Damascus University, where he would marry his first love, Samira Abdullah Atwila, where he would born 3 sons and 5 daughters over the course of their relationship. In 1966, Azzam would graduate from Damascus University, while Israel would militarily occupy Al-Sila, Azzam's home. His family was forcibly evicted from his land, and like many others, they would enter the West Bank. This would be the last time he would set foot in Palestine ever again. Azzam was officially a refugee. This would help shape Azzam's political mindset from this point forward. Through the forced eviction of his home, in which over the course of his life, he would never have a true home where he could raise a family in. And by June 5th, 1967, the countries of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan would try to invade Israel in hopes of overthrowing its nationalist government. It failed. Through the effects of the Six-Day War would forever be felt throughout the Arab world, the defeat helped to delegitimize Arab republics and secular ideologies. As during this period, Arab nationalism under President of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, being the spokesman of Arab nationalism, which was the prominent ideology in the Arab world. However, the loss was pivotal and helped to give rise to transnational Islamism. Replacing secular Arab nationalism over the next 15 years, Islamism began to attract many looking for a new beginning, as Israeli occupation of more Arab land and increased suffering of the Palestinian people witnessed the suffering of the Islamic people as a symbol. The war had also displaced Palestinians, as over 300,000 left for the West Bank and Gaza Strip over the late 1960s and early 70s. Azzam had always felt that jihad and Palestine were first and foremost a religious duty. He believed all Arabs who are able should fight against the Israeli occupation, as Azzam believed Arab rulers exploited Palestine for popularity. Azzam despised the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and he saw them as a socialist ideology, yet held Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in a more beneficial respect due to their goals of spreading Islamic thought. One of the primary influences of Azzam was Sayyid Qutb from Egypt. Also a Brotherhood member, Qutb had written many books that included the spread of Islamism to Arab republics and inviting Muslims abroad to live in Arab lands due to the poisonous influence of Western democracy, in which he saw as an affront to Islam itself. Muhammad Abd al-Rahman, a leading member of the Muslim transnational movement of the Brotherhood, began impressed with Azzam over the years. He would take Azzam to many countries, where he would hold lectures while learning how to conduct speaking engagements before large crowds. The secular governments under Syria and Egypt would start cracking down on the Muslim Brotherhood. And in Egypt of 1965, President Gamal Abdel Nasser began cracking down on thousands of Muslims, as many were arrested and tortured in Egyptian prisons. Another event that took place in the young Azzam's life would be the execution of one of the earliest influences of his life, Sayyid Qutb. Egyptian authorities had arrested Qutb as he was suspected of plotting a coup against the Egyptian government. On August 29, 1966, Sayyid Qutb was executed by hanging. His death would reverberate throughout the Islamic world, and he was immediately considered a martyr. And his authored books, which became the primary reading material over the next 40 years, was throughout the Islamic world. Azzam was crushed by the crime of the Egyptian government and decided to fight against the Arab nationalist Gamal Nasser by giving dawah, which is a calling Muslims back to the pure form of religion practiced by Muhammad in the early Muslim community. He practiced this anywhere he preached. The Fayyadin referred to various military groups willing to sacrifice themselves for a larger campaign. In this context, to Islam, these sects would begin to prop up in countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. A revitalization of new Islamic thought was beginning to take place over Arab nationalism. After the loss during the Six-Day War, many Arabs saw secular ideology as being the reason for the loss during the conflict. And by March 1968, the Fayyadin began embarking on a guerrilla conflict located on the Jordanian-Israeli border, which saw casualties on both sides, but mainly against the mighty Israeli idea. The Fayyadin insurgents received trainings and weapons from Egypt and Syria. The Fayyadin, however, were mainly leftists, an ideology Azzam was pronounced against. During Azzam's time in Jordan, he would witness clashes between the Fayyadin and the Islamists. The conflict would attract attention from the Jordanian government led by King Hussein. In 1970, Azzam would begin holding lectures at mosques in urban Jordan, which would be highly critical of communism. Hussein tolerated the Islamists for fear of internal retribution, which would harm his citizenry. However, by September of 1970, that would change, and the Fayyadin insurgents began a series of assassination attempts on Hussein while hijacking 4 airliners at the Dawson Field airstrip. The Population Liberation Front for Palestine were the primary adversaries who campaigned what is now known as Black September. At the same time, Azzam was highly critical of the governments of Jordan and Syria, and with their reputation for cracking down on Palestinian youth. Azzam came away impressed by the Muslim youth who participated in the Israeli conflict. Azzam needed the right opportunity to give them a real motivation for religious jihad, which would come in a future date, one that would be entirely unexpected. In 1967, just a few years earlier, Azzam had moved to the town of Baba in southwest Saudi Arabia. Here, he was offered a position at the local Institute for Religious Sciences, the Al-Mahad al-Ilmi. The school was to bring Wahhabi principles to local provinces. It was not uncommon for Muslim brothers from the Levant to teach at these universities. It was here that Azzam became exposed to Hanbali Wahhabism, otherwise known as Salafis. Salafis are not literal, Salafis are literal, not pragmatic. They view themselves as the Salaf, who were predecessors of the earliest Muslims, and they are also less politically motivated. By 1971, Azzam had moved back to Cairo, Egypt, to receive a doctorate in Islamic law at Al-Azhar University. Here, Anwar Sadat is now the president of Egypt, and unlike Nasser, he was quite liberal to Islamism. Sadat had begun releasing most of the Muslim Brotherhood members from labor camps, with most senior members freed by 1974. It was here the Muslim Brotherhood began a rebound. At the end of 1972, Azzam had finished his thesis at Al-Azhar University and passed with the highest possible grade. During his time here, Azzam forged many friendships, some that would help shape the latter part of his life. During the course of his stay in Egypt, Egyptian intelligence had closely monitored Azzam while in Cairo. And in 1974, Azzam returned to Amman, Jordan, where he would become a teacher of Islamic law at the University of Jordan. He was an exceptional speaker, as many from neighboring schools came to listen to him. His home would become a public setting, as many students from his university would come and visit him. Azzam's ability to reach the Islamic youth would pay off in the future. He was called the Sayyid Qutb of Jordan, high praise which humbled Azzam, as he considered Qutb the primary influence of his life. Azzam has also quickly risen in the Jordanian Brotherhood and was selected in the group's consultative council, the Masjid al-Shura, a governing body of 40 members. The Brotherhood was actively against the leftists and King Hussein, and was ever grateful as he considered the leftists, the Fayyadin, the enemy. Hussein tolerated the Qutbis for now. Azzam accepted that Muslims living under non-religious governments should be motivated to push dawah. During the mid-1970s, Azzam would travel around the world, and young Islamists were now studying at foreign universities doing lectures and so forth. Islamism was on the rise. And in 1975, during Hajj, Azzam was invited to speak at the Council of the Great Scholars about the dangers of polytheism in the form of man-made legislation. As Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab had fought against grave worshipping, so should the Muslims against man-made laws, Azzam had declared. He would begin criticizing the Jordanian government in 1978 as being too un-Islamic, accusing the government as not being very much interested in the Palestinian struggle. Jordan would begin cracking down on Islamist-speaking engagements, and the Muslim Brotherhood may have pushed Azzam out of Jordan since they had a tentative relationship to operate freely in the country. Azzam had written a document in 1980 complaining to the Shura Council about the Muslim Brotherhood and himself. They had felt excluded from activities and ignored in his meetings. However, he would still display loyalty to the Brotherhood. As fate would befall Azzam again in 1980, a letter was received in his hands. It came from a fellow Muslim Brotherhood professor in Egypt. Muhammad al-Muslib had invited Azzam to come to Saudi Arabia and teach at the prestigious Abd al-Azad University at the Faculty of Sharia. Azzam and his family desperately needed financial stability and accepted this offer without hesitation. Pan-Islamism, a strand of Islamism aimed at promoting Muslim solidarity, was beginning to take shape in Western Saudi Arabia. Just 13 years ago, Azzam was first introduced to Wahhabi ideology while teaching here at the Al-Had al-Ilmi. He never forgot the lesson. Pan-Islamism was motivated by three basic ideas. All Muslims are one people. The Muslim world are under assault by non-Muslim forces. Muslims in different countries should help one another. Pan-Islamism began with the regional and domestic Saudi political developments under the promotion of Wahhabi ideology. The Muslim World League, a pan-Islamic non-profit organization or NGO based in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, that aims to clarify the true message of Islam by advancing moderate rules, played a major role. During the 1970s, Islamic charities grew, and the Gulf oil boom gave the Muslim community large funding opportunities. While living in Jeddah, Azzam had published many works. It was during his teaching studies at the Abd al-Aziz University that another prominent figure would become influenced by Azzam's lectures. Osama Bin Laden, a young Saudi and son to Muhammad ibn Awad bin Laden, the construction magnate to the largest construction firm in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Bin Laden Group. Bin Laden enrolled at King Aziz Al University to achieve his bachelor's of business administration. However, he would become oftentimes a visit to Azzam while teaching Islamic law. He quickly became enamored of his lessons. Azzam, however, became quickly transfixed at joining a true Islamic jihad. Fate, once again, would befall Azzam. This time from a letter which came from another Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood member, Kamal al-Sataniri, who enticed Azzam to join a conflict taking place in Afghanistan. He wrote, "Abdullah, your place is there, not here. Pack your bags and trust in God." Azzam gave some thought to the proposal, and al-Sataniri promised to meet Azzam there, which prompted Azzam to indulge the offer. By September of 1981, Azzam had flown to Islamabad International Airport, not knowing that al-Sataniri had been arrested shortly by Egyptian authorities and jailed. He was also killed under the excessive use of said torture. Azzam, however, would take residency with Abd Rabib Rasul Sayaf, the legend of Peshawar and leader of the Northern Alliance. Sayaf had known Azzam from previously learning about Azzam while he held lectures in Cairo. Sayaf allowed Azzam's family to stay at his large farming house in Peshawar and told Azzam about the demise of al-Sataniri. One of his neighbors was a prominent Saudi official, Muhammad Salim al-Hamoud, whom collaborated with Azzam about jihad prospects in Peshawar. However, Azzam needed to find a place of employment and was given an offer to teach at the Faculty of Sharia at the University of Islamabad. Many foreign fighters would begin traveling to Pakistan to join the fight against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Many leading Afghan leaders of the Mujahideen would begin traveling to the Gulf to garner the support of the conflict. One such Mujahideen leader, Jalaluddin Haqqani, founding leader of the Haqqani network, would begin sending representatives to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to establish information offices. Afghan Mujahideen also began publishing many works and publications to spread the message of an Islamic awakening. One of the very first groups to respond to the conflict were the Pan-Islamists. They responded primarily due to the enemy being a secular invader committing human atrocities on Islamic lands against the Islamic people. Following them were Saudi and Gulf donors, whom responded to the Mujahideen message. And wealthy Gulf Arabs had traveled to Pakistan to give money to relief workers of the Mujahid. Some of the funding went to Lahore and Islamabad, while some of it went to the Jamaat-e-Islami, led by Mian Taril Muhammad, with one of these donors being Osama Bin Laden. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, primary leader of the Hizb-e-Islami, had the largest community of Mujahideen out of all the warlords and would begin receiving funding not just from the Saudis, but also from the CIA, the Pakistan ISI, and British MI6. Many Saudi and Gulf donors had begun to visit Peshawar to engage with the leading Afghan Mujahideen leaders to speak about the future of the conflict. Some of these leaders were Yunus Khalis of the Hizb-e-Islami Khalis, Abid Rabib Rasul Sayaf of the Northern Alliance and the Ittihad al-Islami, Nasrallah Mansour, Muhammad Nabi, Ahmed Jalini of the National Islamic Front of Afghanistan, Sibghatullah Mujaddad of the Afghan National Liberation Front, Burn Hamuddin Rabbani of the Jamiat-e-Islami, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Hizb-e-Islami Hekmatyar, and Jalaluddin Haqqani of the Hizb-e-Islami Khalis, later the Haqqani network. The Muslim World League would also send its primary delegation spokesman, Mohammed al-Mujahib, along with Saudi donors, but were shocked to witness the internal strife between the warlords regarding financing, logistics, and unimportant pettiness. This would leave Azzam totally disengaged with the politics surrounding the Soviet-Afghan conflict, vowing to never engage with the Afghan warlords. This also led to the constant strife and disagreements of having foreign fighters, Arabs, to join the fight alongside the Afghans. The Afghans had considered the Arabs unqualified militarily. However, Sayaf and Haqqani disagreed and invited Arabs to join with them. Haqqani would become an important ally to Azzam, who was seen as an outsider. It was during 1983 that Mustafa Hamid tried to operate a foreign recruitment office called the Global Islamic Office. However, Hamid was lacking not just in resources, but also financing the operation. Azzam would notice that the Afghan Mujahid were largely fragmented due to differences ranging from ideology and strategy, as well as their leaders' personalities and ambitions. Azzam was keen to unite the Afghan Mujahideen. He would later write, "I had a passion to unite Hekmatyar and Sayaf because I saw them as the most honest and able to lead the jihad." Meanwhile, Pakistan's support for the war was of the primary concern that the Soviets would invade them as well. Using the Pakistan Inter-Service Intelligence Agency, the ISI, to act as a financial conduit and funding them with money and weapons to Peshawar, then to Kabul. Pakistan ISI General Akbar Abdul Rahman and Pakistan ISI Director General Hamid Gul had deep involvement with the Afghan Mujahideen. With bin Laden acting as the Saudi Intelligence Directorate conduit, bin Laden immersed himself into the conflict, using his father's company trucks to build roads and ditches, which has risen him in popularity with the Mujahideen. The Afghan Central Intelligence Agency station in Islamabad had also begun acting as a conduit for funding the Mujahideen fighters. Although Pakistan ISI would later claim their involvement was minimal, it would later turn out to be the opposite. By the 1980s, many foreign Arabs from the United States and Gulf were descending into Pakistan, inexperienced and also without proper support for housing and food. Azzam had feared that American NGOs were trying to westernize Afghanistan and began resenting their presence. Azzam would soon begin expelling them, and American NGOs began noticing that many of their critiques were Arab foreign fighters who openly insulted him. Slowly but surely, anti-Americanism was beginning to give rise in the middle of the decade. Azzam, meanwhile, had traveled to Peshawar and lobbied senior Saudi clerics in the Muslim Brotherhood for assistance in the war. It was during this period that Azzam began noticing that the Arab foreign fighters were coming in record numbers into Peshawar. His idea was simple: to begin operating an office to properly train and help educate the Mujahideen. Azzam traveled to Saudi Arabia along with his friend Abdullah Anas to perform Hajj and invited Osama Bin Laden, Wael Juladdin, and Jamal Khalifa to meetings. The meeting would begin operating a recruitment office for Arabs. It would be called the Maktab al-Khidamat, or from the English, the Afghan Services Bureau. It would serve two purposes: to have Arabs serve the Afghan Mujahideen and to be the starting point for Arabs in the service of Afghans. The Bureau would work in a variety of domains: logistics, education, and medical support. Azzam knew Bin Laden had the financial backing to help kickstart the operation and plead his case furiously. Bin Laden came away enthusiastically and agreed to help financially support the operation. Azzam had then invited Abdul Rasul Sayyaf to agree to the operation, which would take place in his domain, Peshawar. Sayyaf, Bin Laden, and Abdul Anas came to a total agreement. At first, the Bureau existed in the Muslim Student Union located in the University of Peshawar. This became infeasible due to the constant stream of Arab fighters. Bin Laden then rented a house in Peshawar in November of 1984. The house was named Abu Hamza Bayat in honor of an Afghan mujahid killed while doing a mission in Afghanistan. In 1985, the Bureau adds another house, the Bayat Abu Uthman. This was used for visiting donors and VIPs. Bin Laden then sets up another house, the Bayat al-Ansar. Then another guest house, the Bayat al-Shuhada. And by 1988, the Maktab al-Khidamat would have 8 buildings operating within Peshawar. Azzam would be named Emir, leader of the Bureau, with Mamdouh Mahmoud Salim acting as deputy leader, or Munir, and it would comprise of 2 committees: the Bureau Committee, or called the Jamaat al-Maktab, and the Consultative Committee, or the Majlis al-Shura. The Consultative Committee would have members such as Osama bin Laden, Wael Juladdin, Abu al-Bara, Abu Hufada al-Urduni, Nur al-Din, Abu Dawood al-Urduni, Abu Makda al-Sharkasi, and Abu Hajar al-Iraqi. Soon, other committees would help shape the Bureau, consisting of a reception committee, an education committee, a scholars committee, orphans and wife committee, a medical committee, and a media committee. The Bureau would be subsidized anywhere between $200,000 and $300,000 annually throughout the decade. Azzam, however, had a holistic view of the conflict. He believed that education, medical care, and logistics were as important as fighting. The Bureau's main goal was to help receive Arab volunteers worldwide, offering them food and accommodations, also to collect valuable information inside Afghanistan. However, running the Bureau would become problematic, as many employees would be inexperienced and also from all around the world, which would impose bureaucratic problems. By 1985, these internal problems had to be dealt with immediately, as it threatened the existence of the operation. Many meetings between the deputy leaders and the committee leaders addressed many of the problems facing the Bureau, thus saving the base of operations for the time being by replacing many high-ranking leaders. The Maktab al-Khidamat, however, played a major role in the mobilization of Arabs during the war. Azzam would begin traveling first to Saudi Arabia, where he solicited tens of millions from Saudi donors, then by going to Kuwait, where he knew a strong Muslim Brotherhood branch existed, as well as several charities to openly support the Mujahideen. By 1987, Azzam had traveled to the United States and spoke at the Muslims Arab Youth Association in Kansas City and Detroit. Azzam's lectures began circulating in tapes throughout the world, especially in Southeast Asia. He was a fantastic orator, an energy-driven speaker, always wearing his traditional Afghan clothing and parkol hat. However, during his lectures, Azzam's audience were left to decipher what mujahideen actually meant. According to Tamim al-Adani, a Palestinian who traveled to the U.S. alongside Azzam, the Americans had interpreted Azzam's use of the mujahideen all wrong. Quote, I noticed that some people in America misunderstood the word mujahideen. They have had bad information or bad understanding of that word. They think mujahideen are people who attack people or hijack planes, aircraft like those who hijacked the Kuwait aircraft. We are against this completely. This is not jihad. This is nonsense. Jihad is fighting for the sake of Allah to protect our religion. Those who are doing hijackings, it's completely against Islam. End quote. However, Azzam oftentimes breached his own rules of conduct during war. If non-combatants mingled with the enemy, all are to be killed. In 1988, Azzam gave a lecture at a mosque in which a response came from the crowd. Is it permissible to take revenge on American Jews present in America? Give the verse, kill them wherever you find them? Azzam responded, of course it is permissible. Azzam had hoped after the war that Afghanistan would be set up as an Islamic state, which would be used as a military base for an Islamic army to recapture all of the lost Islamic territories and unite them as a transnational caliphate. Azzam wanted an immediate and comprehensive militaristic response to liberate Afghanistan and Israel. He was also hostile towards secular Arab governments. Although he was positive toward the Saudi kingdom, he was apprehensive as them as well. During the middle period of the 1980s, he had close affiliations with the Takfiris, who are radical Arabs and saw secular Arab leaders as infidels, and he began closely embracing Wahhabi Islam, the school of thought that he learned while living in Saudi Arabia. While he did espouse anti-Western views, he was also quite adamant about disallowing violence against the West as well. He stated that Islam and Judeo-Christianity are in a never-ending conflict. Azzam was convinced that the United States was trying to weaken Afghanistan so they could not move on to Palestine, even though the Afghan Mujahideen were quite thankful to the West for its support. Azzam was known as the Alim Mujahideen, Islamic scholar of jihad, fighting at heart. He considered the spiritual preparation was a prerequisite for success in battle. Afghan Arabs, whom were also pragmatic, disagreed with Azzam. They did not share Azzam's view of a spiritual conflict. Azzam was not favored by the Arab foreign fighters who saw the conflict in militaristic terms. And by 1985, when Abu Hajir al-Iraqi took over as executive director of the Bureau, he tried to understand the view of Arabs and beefed up military portfolios. Bin Laden was one of the more prominent foreign fighters who grew restless of Azzam's view of the war and was visually seen on the front lines against the Soviets in the battlefield. Bin Laden and al-Iraqi wanted to use the Bureau to become more aggressive militarily. Together, Bin Laden and Abu Hajir al-Iraqi developed the Sada camp, bringing in Abdul al-Aziz Ali Mohammed, Abu Burnham al-Suri to begin military training. The Sada camp's main function was to serve as a boot camp for new recruits. At about this time, another individual began his travel to Peshawar. He had fled Egyptian persecution and imprisoned torture. His name was Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian physician and leading member of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, who came to offer his skills as a doctor to wounded mujahideen. He started his services at the Red Crescent in Kuwait, and he would later have a major influence to not just Azzam, but to Osama Bin Laden as well. By 1986, Bin Laden and Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri traveled to Afghanistan to begin loading new prospects for a training camp. They found a potential spot in the northern Patkia province. The camp would be named by Bin Laden It was called Al-Masada, or the Lion's Den. The camp specifically resided in Jaji, Patkia province. Joining the camp were some of bin Laden's closest associates from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, such as Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri, Abu Khalid al-Masri, and Abu Hajir al-Iraqi. And by February of 1987, the al-Masada camp was up and running with al-Banshiri acting as commander and al-Iraqi as its chief instructor. Arabs at al-Masada became more hardline. Most of the prominent members would later become the founding members of Al-Qaeda. Early documents about the formation of Al-Qaeda are from the Tariq Osama and Tariq Musadat collections. They contain scanned documents from bin Laden's inner circle from 1987. These documents were found by Bosnian authorities in 2002 in the Sarajevo office of the Benevolent International Foundation, an Islamic charity with links to bin Laden. These documents would later become public knowledge during the trial of Inan Anut, a Syrian American who pleaded guilty to using charitable donations to support fighters in Bosnia without the knowledge of his donors. These were the three factors for the emergence of Al-Qaeda: the demand of high-quality military training from Afghan Arabs, the victorious Battle of Jaji, running al-Masada as a proto-organization. Al-Qaeda, also known as the base, shorthand for the people associated with the base, or people associated with al-Masada. According to the Tariq Osama August 11 document, notes taken from August 11, 1988, a meeting between Abu Rida al-Shuri and an unknown sheikh, the agenda was the shaping of a new military network, a three-tier training system consisting of a general camp and a special camp and a base. The major early influences for the formation of Al-Qaeda were the following: Osama Bin Laden, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri, Jamal al-Fadl, Abu Ayyub al-Iraqi, Abu Hafs al-Masri, later known as Muhammad Aitaf, Abu Khalid al-Masri, Abu Hajir al-Iraqi, and Mahmoud Salim. In the beginning, Al-Qaeda did not have any clear or objective geopolitical agenda. Thus, the movement did not make any declarations against any governments or their secular religious mindsets. What gave the bin Laden camp of al-Masada legitimacy was the Battle of Jalalabad. The Pakistan ISI, along with Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto and the CIA, had pushed the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets and Afghan nationalists by allowing imprisoned Mujahideen who were in exile in Peshawar to transfer to Jalalabad. The battle was intense, but the push never came. The Afghan Arabs suffered a terrible defeat. Many Arabs fragmented from the Bureau and Al-Qaeda, creating more uncontrolled, impractical core of men who wanted action. They did not care about consequences. Meanwhile, Hamid Gul would call them the Jalalabad School of Jihad, who practiced increased militarism and the total disrespect for authority. There were theological differences between the Afghans and the Salafi Arabs, with Afghans coming from the Hanafi school of thought and the Salafi, the Hanbali school of thought. The foreign fighters' experience while in Afghanistan came in three life experiences: thrills and hardship of military life, the pleasures of companionship, and the sense of religious purpose. The Soviet-Afghan War was responsible for creating the jihadi culture, which exists still to the present day. In the forms of music and video, it exemplifies the nature of the Mujahideen. Azzam had five main slides which were hostile toward him. All five had an agreement toward Azzam. One was the Pakistan government, which were concerned about the Afghan Arabs' military activities. The Saudi Salafi establishment disliking his Muslim Brotherhood orientation. The revolutionaries in Peshawar, who found him too moderate. The allies of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who disliked his rapport with Ahmed Shah Massoud of the Northern Alliance. And the Israelis, who became alert to his involvement with the Palestinian Intifada. Azzam had become too oblivious in his movements. While the end of his Soviet-Afghan conflict came to a head, numerous associates, and even from his family, tried to get Azzam to hire a bodyguard, to which Azzam replied that he would rather die as a martyr than to become afraid of this world. On November 24th, 1989, just as the last of the Soviet trucks began leaving the capital of Kabul, Abdullah Azzam, with his two sons, Muhammad and Ibrahim, in his car, were off to the Saud al-Lail mosque where Azzam had often preached. It was 12:20 p.m. when he was crossing the Great Trunk Road and Arbab Road when a roadside bomb was detonated. The bomb was concealed under a small bridge that took cars over a ditch. Two devices, one on each side of the bridge. It killed them all immediately and tore the car to pieces. Azzam's burial that evening was a major event. Massive outpouring of sympathy, even from the outside of Pakistan, was noted. There were many suspects that were initially blamed. The CIA, the Israeli Mossad, the Pakistan ISI, the revolutionaries in Pakistan, the Saudi jihad, even Osama Bin Laden and Emir al-Zawahiri, who also told false rumors regarding Azzam and his lectures, were blamed for his death, as unproven suspicions suggested that they wanted to take over the Bureau. However, within months of his assassination, the Maktab al-Khidamat fell into disarray. Contract with its American representatives in the United States came to an end, with the unsolved murder of its director, Mustafa Shalabi. The main suspect? Another Egyptian, Omar Abdul Rahman, who ended up taking over the Al-Farouk Mosque, which was next door to the Al-Khifa Refugee Center, the extension of the Maktab al-Khidamat. In 1995, the Maktab al-Khidamat closed down permanently. The leftover funding which it received had dried up during the Gulf War of 1991. With Azzam's death, an increasing growth in Islamic sects began, which led to the continuing fragmentation of the Afghans and Arab community still seen today. The rise of Islamism can be seen with the inability of Arab governments to include the Islamists in national politics, whom began looking to the international stage for operating space. That stage now includes the ongoing conflict between the secularists, the Crusaders, and the Jews, which allowed the intelligence communities to interfere with all the parties involved to induce and manipulate for geopolitical agendas. Azzam's words regarding his devotion to jihad in Afghanistan can be read in his quote made while he came to Peshawar in 1981. They would become prophecy from the man who all came too familiar with his fate throughout his life. Never shall I leave the land of jihad, except in three circumstances. Either I shall be killed in Afghanistan, killed in Peshawar, or handcuffed and expelled from Pakistan.